那我们邀请第一场专题演讲的主持人，台湾临床药学会张玉丽理事长。
So let's start our main course of our conference. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Lee Briscoe Dewey, the president of American Society of Health System Pharmacists. As you may know, TSHP and ASHP has signed MOU in the year 2023. We are truly grateful that Dr. Lee can accept our invitation to join our annual conference. Thank you so much. I have personally met Lee several times in ASHP mid-year meeting and FIP conference. She's always graceful, intelligent, while remaining kind and approachable. You will all get to experience her charm shortly. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Lan. She earned her PharmD from St. John's University and her BS from Albany College of Pharmacy, and has been board certified in pharmacotherapy since 1993. She was named a fellow of ASHP in 2009 and received an honorary doctor of humane letters from Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Science in 2024. Dr. Lee brings more than 3 decades across health system leadership and medication safety. Most recently, she received as Assistant Director of Pharmacy for United Health System Hospital in New York, preceded by Interim Senior Director of Pharmacy at Spectrum Health in Michigan. Earlier, she was Vice President, Network Pharmacy at the Westchester Medical Center Health Network and the Chief Pharmacy and the Medication Safety Officer for the North Shore Health System. Her earlier leadership includes Director of Pharmaceutical Care Services, Clinical Education Consultant at Pfizer, Senior Pharmacist and Infectious Disease Specialist at University Hospital. Beyond operation, she has shared policy and professional standards. ASHP Board of Director member, longtime ASHP House of Delegates member, and on the New York State Board of Pharmacy, where she served as the chair and the vice chair and the lead committees on sterile compounding and examinations. She is also deeply engaged in education as a clinical faculty at Binghamton University and adjunct faculty with St. John's University and the Albany College of Pharmacy, mentoring the next generation of pharmacists. Today's keynote, titled Innovate, Educate, Advocate, ASHP and Artificial Intelligence in Pharmacy Practice. She will describe AI in pharmacy practice, highlight key opportunities and concerns, and discuss the challenges and opportunities of incorporating AI into pharmacy workflow. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Lee Briscoe Dewey.
You can do it with this one. 925. This one.
The 927. 927, yes. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this gracious invitation. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. I find it very fortunate that the day that my husband and I got on a plane to come to Taiwan, it was World Pharmacist Day. And I thought that was very, very fortunate of what we're going to be able to accomplish together. So to be able to take, a little girl who grew up in a small town in upstate New York. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And because of pharmacy, I flew halfway across the world to join you today. And I think that I've said before that pharmacy is not a job, it's not a profession, it's a calling. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me in answering that call and taking care of our most needy patients. So our objective today, as Charlie said, is to talk about AI and some of the concepts that we have applied in the United States, and really hopefully start some discussion about what's next, because it's no longer a question of whether or not we're going to adopt AI. That ship has sailed, right? So it's a matter of where do we want to be as far as leading AI. We don't want to just be a follower. We need to be a leader. Talk some about some concerns and some opportunities that are going to develop, and just as kind of a thought. So I prepared these slides and I sent them off. I changed them while I was on the plane, and then I changed them again on Saturday evening. So that's how fast AI moves. So by the time I finish, half of what I said will probably be irrelevant, but at least we'll be able to start some conversations. So we all kind of, I think, know what AI is, but it's really using machine learning. And there are some important concepts that I'll hit along the way about some deficits with AI. It certainly makes our life a lot easier. And we can use computer systems to do some of those, I like to say, repetitive tasks, where after the first 100 or so things that you do, right, sometimes it gets boring and you actually lose a little bit of your focus. But a machine is never going to lose focus. And so we can actually use them. I know that we call this artificial intelligence, but the term I really like to use is augmented intelligence, because it's not artificial. We are creating this intelligence. We're putting in the data that gives us the output, right? But it augments us. It gives us more scope. It gives us more time to be able to focus on activities that are really important. And so I think that I like the term augmented intelligence better than artificial intelligence. So as I said, augmented intelligence. So it's clinicians and computers combining their efforts. So we take all of the efforts that clinicians have, but you can take hundreds of thousands or actually millions of papers and studies and put them together, and AI then can help get your response that normally would take you days sometimes, or even years if we're looking at research, to come to a conclusion. AI can come to you much, much faster. And so that means that we can treat our patients faster and get them to a better outcome. Wouldn't it be nice to know before you start a treatment, especially one that's very expensive or one that's using a drug that's in short supply, that it is in fact going to work? And that's what AI will help us do, is be able to determine if the drug therapy that we're going to begin is going to work at all, and what's the most likely way to make that happen. So combining efforts, I think, is one of the best ways that we can use to define AI. So some of the things that we've seen in pharmacy practice across the United States. We use it for electronic prospective medication order review. So if you think about what pharmacists in in the health systems do every day. They validate tens of thousands of orders if you look across the country of Taiwan. Many of those are order sets. Many of those are things from over the counter, things like acetaminophen and bisacodyl, Dulcolax, those types of things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how much more effective we can be if we combine a clinician with AI and determine which of those orders really needs to be reviewed by a pharmacist and which one can be automatically prospectively reviewed. Fluid overload prediction, something that happens in the ICU and can lead to somewhat devastating outcomes. So how do we identify which people are going to be at most risk before we actually start seeing those signs and symptoms? Prior authorization processing. It's up to probably 40% of a clinician's time to get prior authorizations approved, and we need to work on some ways to make them more effective and more efficient, because clinicians shouldn't be doing paperwork and administrative work. Ambient listening, to actually provide a medical note at the end of a physician appointment that a physician doesn't have to write. Ambient listening will write it for them. They can just go through and check it and make sure that it's complete. Drug information services, and one I love especially is drone medication delivery service. And this is actually something that we're starting to see in the Cleveland Clinic has done some. Henry Ford Hospitals in Michigan has done it. And the Syracuse University Hospital in upstate New York has also done that. Several times. So at my hospital where I was in Binghamton, we were a partner site, if you will, with Syracuse University Hospital. And we would sometimes need to borrow drugs back and forth. And it's probably a 2-hour drive if you had to put somebody in a car and drive them up. Sometimes we couldn't find a courier. If it was late at night, we've actually had to call an Uber and have an Uber drive 2 hours to deliver a drug to get it to the hospital on time. Well, with medication drone delivery, we can put that in a drone and it can be there in probably 30 minutes, and it doesn't cost as much as an Uber. Our biggest problem there is getting the FAA approval to make sure that we're not interfering with any flight patterns. But just thinking about things like that can change something simple, an everyday process that's important. So I talked a little bit before about the electronic prospective medication order review. And in the United States, that's a requirement that all orders are prospectively, when possible, reviewed by a pharmacist before they are administered to a patient. So we've come a long way with looking at things like telepharmacy. So even small hospitals have the ability to contract out that service, and so someone can do it from another hospital that's open, because many hospitals are still not open 24 hours a day from the pharmacy. So we look at things, so one step above telepharmacy now is saying, well, which one of these orders really need to be reviewed by a pharmacist? And so if all the pharmacists in the room, think about the last time that you didn't approve an order for oral acetaminophen. Did you ever? So when you start adding up, and when you talk to some administrators, it's like, yeah, but that's just an over-the-counter drug. How really effective is it going to be if we do automatic verification of that? Well, we can see that it adds up to a significant amount of time. So our colleagues out of Mayo Clinic in Rochester worked with clinicians and pharmacy informaticists to derive a theory of proof model to see whether or not you could actually train a computer to prospectively review a medication order. And over the course of time, they did. They looked at over 1,500 orders per day for a 5-day period and found that for most of these over-the-counter products that you'll see here, the computer system was just as good as at validating those orders as was the pharmacist clinician. And so when they looked at all of these orders together, they realized that for almost half of the orders that the pharmacists were reviewing could be reviewed through AI technology. And that means that 45% probably are are the ones that had to be reviewed by a pharmacist. So those that were a little bit more complicated. A patient had renal function or a liver problem or had fluid status overloads or perhaps had an allergy. But when you added up all the time that it took, it saved almost 28 hours a week. And so this is where the augmented intelligence thought comes into play, right? We're not going to just get rid of a pharmacist for that 28 hours. We're going to be able to take that pharmacist, redeploy them, and put them somewhere else. We know, for example, that if you have a pharmacist involved in your care in the ICU, you are less likely to die. So as an administrator, my question would be, how do I get more people in the ICU? And this is how we get more people in the ICU without having to add more staff. Because first of all, it's very difficult to try to add staff in this days of financial insecurity. And secondly, we are having a drought of pharmacists in the United States. So the number of people who are graduating from pharmacy school every year are less than those that are leaving the profession due to retirement. So even if we wanted to hire new pharmacists, we might not have them to hire. So we have to think of different ways to be more efficient with the pharmacist staff that we have. And so this is one of those ways that we can do that. So fluid overload prediction. This was a study that was, I forget exactly where it was done right now, which hospital it was done at, but they looked at combining all of the indicators that would lead to a definition or a progression to fluid overload. And they looked at hundreds of thousands of patients over the course of 6 years. And they were able to combine all that data using an AI model to then predict, based on that first 6 years of data, be able to predict going forward which patients were more likely to have fluid overload. And so they were able to be much more effective in identifying those patients before fluid overload happened, cut back on the fluids that they were being administered so that, in fact, they didn't progress to a fluid overload. If they don't progress to a fluid overload, they're not getting congestive heart failure or pulmonary congestion in their lungs, which would lead them to be on a respirator for perhaps longer, which I don't have to go into that whole process of why that's a bad idea. So little things like this can actually help us make our ICUs safer and help people get out of the ICU faster, which is always going to be one of our goals. I talked to you a little bit earlier about the prior authorization processing. And this is a process by which insurance companies request a prior authorization or some kind of clinical indication for using some drugs, which means, have you used these first 3 drugs? Is there a reason why you're moving from one drug to another? Have they had an appropriate trial length of one of the drugs that is perhaps less expensive before you move on to one of these more expensive drugs, which you can probably understand if a drug is going to go, if there's a drug that's available that costs, for example, $600 a month, and this one is going to cost $60,000 a month, you can probably see why we might want to have some stopgaps around that. But it takes a lot of time. And physicians really don't have a whole lot of time to spend processing these types of prior authorizations. And so by automating it, they're much likely to, they say 40% of a physician's time. They're much more likely to be an appropriate indication. The applications are likely to be completed and are therefore not going to delay therapy, because if you don't have the appropriate information on the application form, it's going to get denied. And what we found in one of our studies was physicians would actually have a drug that required prior authorization that was probably the best drug for the patient, but they chose not to use it because they didn't want to go through the prior authorization process. And so it was really having a negative impact on patient care. And so I think that's one of the things that makes me most excited about looking at some of this AI technology is improving patient care, but taking away some of this administrative burden. So if we talk about the administrative burden, the amount of paperwork and documentation that is required in healthcare today, in the United States, that accounts for anywhere from $600 billion to $1 trillion a year. Now, that's almost 20% of our entire healthcare burden We spend about $6 trillion, I think was the latest number that I heard. So to be able to not have to spend time doing administrative tasks and paperwork and documentation and having clinicians taking care of patients is one of the biggest benefits that I see for AI. Drug information services. So we've all done that, right? We all had a drug information rotation, and you had to go through and answer all your drug information questions, and you had to look at maybe, 2, 3 tertiary references and pull out some of the latest drug studies and come up with an answer. Well, what drug information services do once you look at AI is they have the entire library of drug studies available to them. So, and they can do it in a fraction of the amount of time. So something that would take you weeks and weeks and weeks to be able to cull through to come up with an answer, AI can do with the appropriate prompts in a matter of minutes. And so getting an appropriate answer with the vast amount of data is going to make our drug information services much more effective. Other things that we look at for AI, clinical decision support, certainly. Drug shortage prediction, and we've talked a little bit about drug shortages already today, and I know that that's an issue here. So drug shortages are not just an issue with a single drug, right? Because when one drug goes short, now we have to look at alternatives, and then they're going to go short because everybody's going to move to those alternatives. So having AI and some computer modeling in place to help us determine what are the opportunities that we have for secondary line products, which is going to be the most effective, and how do we anticipate how the domino effect of what a drug shortage is going to look like. How long before that drug shortage is no longer a problem? How long is it going to take to get supply up again and then delivered? So a lot of times we're literally just doing this on a day-to-day basis. We have no idea what's happening today. We look and we see maybe it's coming, maybe it's not. Did we get some? How much did we get? But with AI and better data, computer modeling, we're much better able at predicting what drugs we're going to have, when should we use them, and when can we predict that there's going to be a revocation from that shortage. Drug spend forecasting. This is something that we all do. Budget season is never fun, but it's really done with a calculator and guessing how much we're going to spend next year based on what we spent this year. It's kind of like I say, it's like shooting darts. You shoot a dart at the wall, and whatever number it hits, I'm like, that's the number I'm going to put down on my budget. But now we actually, with better computer forecasting, will be much more efficient at predicting what the drug spend is going to be. And that's important because we need to, if we're not accurate in predicting our budget, we're going to predict that we're going to spend more money on drugs. We're not going to get some people that we need. And if we're much more accurate in what we're looking for from a drug standpoint, from a spend standpoint, or from an investment standpoint, maybe we can look at then moving on to buying better computer systems, more people, more accurate automation that's going to complement that AI. Automation optimization. In the United States, we buy a lot of automation, and we use probably 40% of it. So anything that we buy, we don't really optimize. And it's probably true of all of us at home, too. How many people really use 100% of their iPhone? Yet not you, right? So being able to predict and look at modeling to understand where we're not using our automation or how we can better use it. So we know that automated dispensing machines improve safety with barcode technology. They can help us with inventory management, and all these things can pull together and make a better model for us to determine where are we using our time better, where are we using our automation the best, who's not using automation in the way that they should, and be able to maximize the investment of our technology based on what we're finding with AI. Patient and workforce scheduling, and this is actually something that ASHP is looking at some scheduling modeling, because everybody, it's the one job that everybody hates, right? Every manager in the world hates having to put the schedule together. And this way we don't have to, and you can actually base your schedule on days of the week. If you're a surgical center, for example, you know what your surgical calendar is going to look like, how many people you have on the schedule, and you can schedule appropriately according to that, not just the same number of people every day, because the workload is different every day. And so, again, using the people that we have much more effectively. So there's a lot of different ways that we're looking at AI, the potential of AI. Many small studies are in place, things that we're looking at as far as proof of concept to see whether or not we should move on in that particular direction. But as I said, these things are moving very, very rapidly. I think one of the other things that we're going to see is that clinical trials are going to be much more effective. They're going to be finished much more quickly. Right now, clinical trials, if you get a new drug, it's years before you can actually finish that clinical trial. Well, I think that we'll be much better able to predict which patients we should pull in, collecting data from a number of different data sites and not having to spend months and months turning that data over, using AI to help us look at the outcomes of those clinical trials and get results much faster, get new drugs to market faster so that we can cure patients. So there are some ethical dilemmas with AI. Bias and discrimination. So AI is just like most computer systems. It's dependent on the data that you put in. And when I talked before about having drug information systems that will be able to take every single clinical trial that's ever been published and collate that data, that's fabulous, right? Except if you look at most randomized controlled clinical trials, they're relatively small populations. They're not diverse from a patient population standpoint. They're usually skewed toward middle-aged Caucasian men. And so you can't really extrapolate that data into other races, into other, from men into women, and from older into younger. So we do have to be careful about what we're using as our database. Patient privacy and privacy of the medical record. How much of that medical record is going to be involved in getting put into some of these models? And should we have a separate consent form for that? Should someone be able to say, I really don't want the results of this hospitalization or my blood work to be included in these vast data banks? And should they have the right to? And then how do we actually make sure that privacy is respected? Transparency. So transparency is in a couple of ways. First of all, how is the model predicted, and how is the model built? So would the people who are building these models be able to share with us the database that you use? Where are you getting the information that you're building this model from? Because that's going to help us determine whether or not there's bias and discrimination for our patient populations in there. And then, of course, transparency as far as, would you want to know if people are making clinical decisions about your health using an AI model, or as opposed to their single clinical decision? So at what point in time do we say, based on the modeling that we've done with this computer system, we think that you'll respond to this drug, versus you're not going to really respond to this drug, so we're going to look at another one. Accountability. So if there is an error in AI, who has to bear that responsibility? Is it the clinician? Is it the person who developed the model? Is it the company who sold you the model? There's really no answer for that question right now. At the end of the day, the way that I look at it is it's the clinician's responsibility, because you're the one who's ultimately making that decision. Deep fakes. So we've all seen some things. If you're on Instagram or using the internet in any way, you've seen some things that come through that can't possibly be true, and it's not. So how do we know what's real? I don't have that answer for you. But it's something, again, being aware of the fact that it's out there, and if something doesn't feel right, perhaps do a little bit more research and find out if, in fact, it's a deep fake. How do we conserve our professionalism as a trusted profession when we're looking at using computer modeling and using AI as part of our process? And then how do we teach? So I think, you can no longer say that you can't expect students to use drug databases to help answer their questions. So how do we do it right? How do we make sure that they're using the right models? How do we use the right sources? And when is it appropriate and when is it not? So how do we train them to use AI? And then how do we train people like me to use AI? I've been out of school quite some time, so I need to be trained too because I'm still in the workforce. So those are some things that we have to look at from a profession standpoint. So ASHP and AI. So ASHP does something called the forecast, the ASHP Foundation Pharmacy Forecast. And they do a cross-section quiz or cross-section questionnaire of pharmacy directors and administrators all across the country and ask them the likelihood in the next 5 years of certain things happening. And so in 2023, there were 3 questions about AI, and there seemed to be some positivity that AI was going to be able to offer some benefits to patient care. If you can see that in the blue, most of the answers to these questions were that it was likely or very likely that there will be standards for the development of AI, that health systems will be using AI in patient care, and that it was going to offer something that was of value. And the next year, 2024, we asked some more questions, and you can see that it was there were more and more AI models being put into the market, and so I think that people had more questions about them at that point. So our positivity moved to a little bit more neutral thoughts about all the questions about AI that we were asking, and specifically looking at number 3 and 4, that health systems will have the expertise, there we go, I couldn't read it. Health systems could have the expertise to ensure that the AI is being used appropriately, and that pharmacy will have regulations allowing the use of AI. And those seemed, that was just about 50-50, that they really weren't sure about how it was going to be regulated and whether or not there was going to be appropriate oversight. And finally, in 2025, now that there's much more discussion and a lot more platforms out there, you can see that for the most part, everybody is kind of back to an optimism about that the use of AI and the implementation of it is likely or very likely within various aspects of healthcare. The thing that's interesting is that we started asking the next question of, okay, so is this likely to happen or is this, not likely to happen? Then if it's likely to happen, are we prepared to do it? And this is where I think we all kind of have to come together in that we're probably not prepared to be able to validate the effectiveness of AI. The state boards of pharmacy, I can guarantee you that the New York State Board of Pharmacy is not prepared to evaluate AI and say whether or not it can be used in practice. So knowing what I do about the Board of Pharmacy, they're just going to say no. And that's not the appropriate answer either. That health systems will permit artificial AI to communicate with patients. Again, most likely going to happen, but we're not prepared to do it. So this is where education comes into play, and this is where organizations like TSHP and ASHP can come together and develop ways to make sure that we're teaching people to understand what we have to do to make this happen, because we have to be prepared. Again, these things are happening. We can't say that we don't want to do it, right? So it's going to do it. We have to be on board with it. What's the best way to educate our current professionals as well as our students to be able to deal with these different types of questions with AI? So here is a link to the ASHP Foundation Pharmacy Forecast Report for 2025. Feel free to grab that. It's got a lot more information in it other than the AI. The other thing that ASHP has done is we've just released a statement on the use of AI in pharmacy. And for the most part, it gives a great deal of background. It talks about a lot of the things that we've spoken about today. But most importantly, it says that pharmacy leaders should define appropriate medication-related use cases for AI-enabled technology. That means pharmacy doesn't just have to adopt technology, and pharmacy doesn't just have to make sure that it's being used appropriately. Pharmacy needs to lead in these areas. Pharmacy needs to have a seat at the table when the initial discussions are being had, because it's once it starts happening, it's too late to have an impact. So you need to be leading these discussions. You need to be at the table when the decisions are being made. And I know that you've done a lot of work at your respective hospitals to make sure that that's going to happen. We've also developed a policy at our last House of Delegates on the role of artificial intelligence in clinical pharmacy practice. And again, to advocate for its use, to make sure that there's transparency in the models that are being created, and to make sure that pharmacy is leading in the use and the approval of these processes in hospital settings. There is a link to the statement that we have on AI in pharmacy. And then finally, last year in June, we had a Pharmacy Futures, which is the name of our June meeting. We had a summit on AI. It was a 2-day summit, very well attended. We had thousands of people there, and we're able really to look at some discussions, have presentations, but really start pulling together some of what are our next steps? So now that we know where we are with AI, what are our next steps going to be? Because not one person is going to know the answer to that. And so we looked at all of the really smart people in the room, right? That's the first rule of being a leader, right? Is you don't have to know the answer to the questions. You just have to know somebody smarter than you who's got the answer to the questions. And so that's what we do at ASHP. We bring all the smart people in the room and then get and help them, and they help us develop what we need to do next. And so we have the results of the summit were just published in the December version of ASHP in December of 2024. So they looked at what we call the wisdom of the crowd. They again gathered all the smart people in the room and said, where do we go from here? They developed a game plan, which I'm going to share with you. We have 6 domains in that game plan. So society and healthcare. AI should be the standardized framework for healthcare implementation with regulatory framework that protect patient safety and still promote access to innovation. Right? That's kind of a fine line. Patient care can close care gaps, personalize care, and remove barriers to care. AI should be accessible, validated, transparent, trusted, and shared. And one of the things about any kind of technology that I always say is that it needs to be just as available to a 25-bed critical access hospital as it is to an 855-bed trauma center. And so how do we make that happen? Health systems, again, have a significant impact on the workforce of the health systems. But again, pharmacists need to be involved in that process from the very beginning. The pharmacy profession certainly can lead in this process with medication safety, patient processes, and professional standards to manage all of these things, right? So to have a standard by which you can look to evaluate a new process. Pharmacy enterprise. AI affects pharmacy, the entire pharmacy enterprise from the time the patient walks through the door until the time that they leave, and even after that, with continuous monitoring of some chronic disease states. And then the pharmacy workforce. How do we make sure that we're using AI appropriately so that then we can then use all of our clinicians appropriately? So we need to have pharmacists be able to practice not just at the top of their scope, but at the top of their mission. And AI will help us do that. So here's a link to the summit that we had on AI. It's the article that we published in December. So if you want to take a look at that, you can grab that link. And so I just want to close with a little bit of discussion around what ASHP does on an international basis, right? I wouldn't, I wouldn't be doing you a favor if I came here and didn't talk about different ways that we can partner with our colleagues across the world. We do have a residency accreditation process for introductory residencies as well as advanced practice residencies across the world and internationally. And then we have an international health systems pharmacy services accreditation And right now we have hospitals that are accredited in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Qatar, and Spain. We have a global resource consulting and developing where we can come in and work with you to look at problems that you're having as an overall country and see if there are ways that we can partner and give you perhaps some solutions. You have access to all of our policies and procedures and our best practices through our member of understanding. You are all members of ASHP of our international associates, and that's where I had the pleasure to meet your leadership for the very first time. We have publications and attendance at mid-year meetings, which are now globally attended. Our mid-year meeting has 25,000 pharmacists from across the world. It's the largest gathering of pharmacists in the world, and I always really appreciate that when you walk in, there's a big banner that says that. And it's like, you know that you're really part of something big and special when you see that. So I have the honor of chairing the Hospital and Health System International Commission on Credentialing. It's an amazing process. Let me go back. I can't go back. Anyway, it's a process where we have representation from colleagues all across the world. So actually trying to have a call when you're crossing every single time zone is very interesting. We have people who are getting up for a Zoom call in the middle of the night. But we do actually go through and do a whole process by which we look at either your residency for your like an introductory residency or an advanced residency, or in fact a whole process through which we can look at your pharmacy department and give it a credentialing of passing a certification. We have professional certificates in almost every single disease state. They're all distance-based, and we can do them in different languages, and we can do them based on what standards of practice are within your country. We also have studies for educational programs for studying for your board certification exams. So this is a very intensive process, but it's a way to learn from the experts and learn from the people who create the board certification that itself, what resources are best to be able to make sure that you're practicing at the top of your scope. So this is the accreditation service for International Hospital Pharmacy Services. And what it does is it provides a recognition for a high-quality program. So we have oversight standards that are developed by this multidisciplinary team from across the world. Again, pharmacy services, pharmacy practice residency, and it has review and recommendation for accredited programs, initial accreditation, and then follow-up accreditation every 3 years after that. It focuses on the best practice standards, combining all the best practice standards that are available. So from the European Society, from ISMP, the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, the FIP Basel Statements, Joint Commission on International, and ASHP are best practices that we have compiled over the course of the last several years. So what are the benefits of doing this? Hopefully, you have an improved quality of care leading to improved patient outcomes. You have assurance that your policies and procedures are followed consistently throughout your organization, because that's one of the things that we look for. Increased confidence in your pharmacy services, that you are in fact providing the best services, and people will not just want to come to work there, they'll want to come for care there. And a validation of your whole program. Perhaps you'll see a risk management reduction because of the consistency that you'll see with your care. And we look to have a competitive advantage by pharmacies that are accredited versus those that are not. You have formal acknowledgement of your accreditation with a commendation and a seal from ASHP. So there's a whole survey process. It starts with a letter of agreement, and then you receive documentation of the things that the survey team will come in and look for. And you can go through the documents, and when you're sure that you're going to meet those documents, then you apply for the accreditation survey to come in. The survey comes in. Sometimes it's on site, and sometimes it's a virtual survey. It depends on what's going on and what the travel policies are like. So we do a report, we sit down with you, we spend several days with you, going through the documentation and the assessment that you've submitted. And then they go back and they meet with the Commission on Credentialing. They all have the discussion, and then they make a motion as to whether or not that particular hospital has met the accreditation criteria. And when you do, we call and let you know. Right now, we have accredited programs in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, it's in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and in Egypt. We just actually did the Children's Hospital in Egypt last week when we had our Commission on Credentialing. So here is more information to our International Accreditation Services. If you're interested, go ahead and grab that link. Or talk to Charlie, either one, right? So, all in all, what's next, right? What are our key takeaways, and what do we have to do next? So we know that AI is here, and we know that there are ways that we can use AI to innovate our practice and to practice at the top of our license. So we have to make sure that we're continually seeking the opportunities to make sure that that happens, educating ourselves, educating our staff, educating our future workforce with our students, and educating our administrators to show how AI can help pharmacy, help patients, and help their whole medical practice. And then when you need to, which is pretty much probably every day, you have to advocate for the use of AI to make sure that it's done appropriately, that it's not being done without appropriate oversight, and that pharmacists are leaders at the table with that. So when you're advocating for not just for your profession, but you're advocating for the use of AI led by your profession. So at this point, I'm a couple minutes over. I apologize. But I will be happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your very, inspiring and insightful and informative presentation. I think because the time limit, maybe we don't have time to open questions.
I did that on purpose, just so you know.
But actually, we have a very special meeting in September 13 in this Tuesday, 下星期二早上. If you have any question, we will open a hybrid meeting. We can face-to-face to talk with our President, Lian. So you just save your time and don't forget, if you want to ask question, 9月30号上午. 谢谢. So let's give President Lee a very round applause. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, our honored guest, for such inspirational speaking. Now we invite our special guest and the president of TSHP, Dr. Yuli Zhang, up onto the stage. Dr. Yuli Zhang is going to represent our society, presenting a token of appreciation and certificate of thanks. We are truly grateful for your meaningful contribution to today's event. Thank you.